Welcome to Tea Time with Shaylee and Amber, the podcast where we talk about all the shit that your horse wants you to know and what you can do about it. Amber is a horse trainer and a personal results coach, certified in Theta and Semitic breathwork. Shaylee is an animal communicator who also teaches communication. Both knowledge seekers with the intention of sharing that knowledge and hoping that we can encourage the listeners to do the same. Welcome to today's guest episode with Alexa Linton. Alexa is the founder of the Whole Horse podcast, an author, an osteopath, an animal intuitive, kinesiologist, and a lifetime student. And dare we say, a total self-proclaimed nerd for all things horse. And we are totally here for that. We hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Alexa has an apprenticeship program and several other online programs that we will be sure to link in the show notes. All right, let's go.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Amber and I are super excited to be introducing Alexa Linton. Thank you for joining us, Alexa.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thanks. Yeah.
Super happy to have you. I was just saying right before we got on the call that I was hardcore fangirling. I absolutely love the Whole Horse podcast that Alexa has. And would you mind just kind of, for anybody who doesn't know of your work yet, kind of describe like what you do? I know you're kind of like a jack of all trades, like you do osteopathy and you have your apprenticeship and cranial work and animal communication and like all the things. So yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about like your journey?
Yeah, I will try to keep it in a slight nutshell. I think that the general overview is that I'm very much addicted to learning. So right out of high school, I went and became a kinesiologist and then decided to pursue my passion, I became an equine sport therapist. And then I got like super interested in energy medicine. And then that's when I started doing more of my animal communication and energy work piece. And then had sort of been like having this inkling of, wanting to get back into working with manual therapy. And I'm just so geeky, like I just can't help myself. And so the osteopathy started sort of like coming in different ways. My sister had a really great experience with it, and I had a couple of amazing sessions. And so I just like dropped into the ultimate geekiness, which is osteopathy. And did a 5.5 year program that finished in, I guess, December 2021. And so, and I'm also like computer techie geeky. So hence like my online courses and my apprenticeship and, doing stuff in like the online space. I really enjoy the ability to connect people all around the world, particularly around something that we're mutually passionate about, which is horses and horse welfare. It just seemed like a really cool kind of bringing together of all these things. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I have 2 horses, as I chat about them incessantly on my podcast, Diva and Raven. And they basically look alike. I have a type, apparently. They're both dark bays. Raven's a purebred Canadian. Diva's a Bertrand Morgan mare. And my life sort of, as you probably get, just rotates around these ladies and my other animals. And it's really quite a privilege to have them in my world. So,
Yeah, it's so funny how we have types with horses. Amber and I were just talking about this because she has 3 tiny little redheads and I have 3 giant black, like dark bay horses.
Yes.
And it's just so funny how that works out.
Completely. I know my dark mares. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do actually, while we're on the topic of your horses, want to ask you a little bit about them. And I was so, I want to say it was maybe your episode like 95 with Susan Tenney and like the elements where I like reached out to you like via Facebook and I was like, this is random, but this episode was amazing. So after listening, so for those of you who haven't listened, Alexa had an interview with someone named Susan Tenney, and she talked about like identifying the element that your horse is, and then certain things that can arise if that element is kind of like in dysfunction or imbalanced. And it was such an interesting pod that I shared all over the place because I'm like, everybody needs to do this. So I'm just curious, like, so Diva, would you consider her your water horse, like kind of the horse that changed everything for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. She just turn the tables on everything for me in my life. Yeah. So when she came into my life, I was 23 and I had just gotten out of a relation, like a 2.5-year relationship. I'd moved out on my own for the first time ever. And I also was starting equine therapy school. It just like so happened. I was starting equine therapy school in September of that year. I met Diva, I think in October. I was leasing a horse at a barn, and the Diva's human just happened to move all her training horses to the barn. And, you know, as life does, she just was in the same sphere. And it just like so happened that, you know, we met and I rode her. And that was it. That was fate. And so there was all these pieces kind of occurring. I was also, of course, at the beginning of my spiritual journey. So this was like right at the seeding time of realizing that, oh, there's a lot more to me than I have ever, you know, contemplated. And of course, having this program where my teacher was sort of incognito, just like a total kind of maverick in his field. So we were learning like applied kinesiology and energy work and like flower essences, like all these things. And that's where I learned about actually the constitutions as well. The elements was through him initially. And so he was opening up my eyes to these other worlds. And then with Diva, our interface, it was very challenging, our interface, because, you know, I think most of us have had that experience when we have, as horse people, a horse that comes into our life, like especially a water horse. And if you listen to this podcast, you'll get it, the one that Shaylee's mentioning, but it's that sense of the horse that makes you look at everything differently. And that was Diva. And so from that point on, you know, transformation is not a comfortable thing. And it was like all at once at that moment. So I was pretty messy for a while there. But looking back, it's like, wow, that was just so incredible to have those kind of teachers all sort of collide in the same moment in my life, and start to open up these other worlds for me, these other ways of seeing things. Yeah, I was pretty blessed, I'd say. Mm-hmm.
No, I think it's so cool how like those right place, right time connections happen. And I feel like in my animal communication sessions all the time, like I will have a horse that will be like, I chose you and this is why I chose you. And the person will be like, oh my gosh, I wasn't going to get in the car that day. And here I was driving to the barn. And I was actually just telling my students the other day about my horse Biggie, because I had just had a horse that passed away. And I was like, I really need you to like send me a sign to let me know that you're good. And then, we can go our separate ways. And so he's like, well, I'm going to send you a flamingo. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't like flamingos at all. Like I never see them. I don't have them in my experience. Like they're just not my vibe. So I'm like, I'll see that for sure. And I had someone reach out to me, a client, where she was like, can I give you this horse? I'm just really struggling with him. I don't know where to go next. And I was on the fence, but I was like, okay, so my husband and I drove 10 hours one way to go and get him. And when I got there, she had flamingos all over her front yard. Like they were everywhere. And we stayed the night. Her towels were flamingos. The sheets of our bed were flamingos. And I had never said anything about this. And I was like, what, you're in Texas, like, why all the flamingos? And she's like, oh, they're my favorite bird. Like, my dog collar has them on. And I'm like, wow, if this wasn't a signier sign, it's so crazy. And then I bring the horse home, and I did not get along with him. Like, I was like, we have major personality conflicts. And he really was my first horse that, and this is recent, this is like, I've only had him for 2 years, that just had a hard no and has forced me to get out of that. Like, he's just really changed my mindset. And what was cool about that podcast, and that's what's so awesome about like being able to share some of this information, for free through the podcast, and so many people can access it and hear it, is I didn't realize how strong the elements could be until I listened to that and realized that he was an earth horse, and that I just wasn't giving him what he needed, and that he was so, and then he had fecal water syndrome for a long time, and I wasn't feeding him the right nutrients that would help an earth horse. So it's just, that was so cool, because it's not that you have to like give people a ton of information, but just that little spark of like, hey, this is something you should think about. This is possible, and maybe you should go for it. And I'm like a deep diver like you too. So it is really cool how they come into our lives, and then they're like, well, you're about to learn something new, so good luck.
Oh, big time. I mean, I tell the story all the time about like how I started with horses. So I grew up in Vancouver, which is like our biggest city here in British Columbia, right? And so, as you can imagine, like we were in suburbia. Horses are like fairly challenging to access, so any barn was like an hour drive away, and you kind of took what you could get, like it was like, okay, like this is what it is. And it was all hunter jumper and extremely like negative reinforcement, and like, and that was just what I knew. And yeah, Diva was like my hard no horse, right? She just said, like, that won't work for me. Like, you need to figure something else out, right? And we hear that so often of these horses coming in. It sort of just caused this pivot, of real change in focus, and a change in our skill set as well, like expanding our skill set into other spaces, because it just doesn't work for them. So yeah, I'm really glad that horse ended up with you. How's it going now?
It's going good now. I've been working a little bit with Lockie Phillips, who is helping me. Like, he's just like, oh, you're too far in the forest. Like, you can't see the tree. And so he's been helping me realize like, oh, we don't have a personality conflict. He like deeply wants to engage with you. You just got to do it this way. And I love that there's like, just going back to that online stuff where you can just engage with each other from halfway across the world and have all those like resources and stuff. And he's definitely teaching me a lot. So we'll see how it goes in the future. But speaking of like just the energetics and stuff, because I know that you're like really big into like herbal energetics too, and food, and Amber knows I'm gonna go here because I've been dying about this. But I'm like, I'm going here today. How do you feel about the energy? Because I have my own opinions, but I feel like you're just such a wealth of knowledge. I've been dying to ask you this question. How do you feel about like the energy that goes into food, like as we're preparing it? So not only like finding, because I just think about all the horses I talk to that like talk about all the supplements and the stuff that they're on. And not only is some of it not aligned with their bodies and what they need, but it's almost like the energy that goes into making the food is not thoughtful, if that makes sense. And I'm just curious, like, because I feel like I set the intention when I make my horse's food that like this herb that I'm putting in is going to do a certain thing. And maybe even it's just the knowledge behind knowing what the ingredients are and what they do for the body. Like that's a piece too. But do you feel that there's an energetic portion that goes like beyond that?
Wow, I love that question. And it's really funny because I'm only in this last year with my sickness, have I been like really, I mean, I knew about food and I know about nutrition and stuff, but I was like kind of a bad eater before everything happened, right? I just like, I loved my junk food and I'm talking like healthy junk food, but like I enjoyed like the occasional donut and like, you know, the other things. And I know I feel like I'm tangential, but I'll get back to the point. But after things happened with my pancreas, it was really, I became so aware of like, I can't eat sugar anymore. I literally like will puke if I eat sugar. Like it's very unfun. So, you know, my body said like, this is a hard no. And I think most bodies don't do that, but because of my my situation with my pancreas and things, it's like, it's quite like, my body's quite like communicative about what I'm needing. But it really helped me to realize like, okay, everything that goes into my body has a purpose and a reason, and that like to put the good things in for me and to yeah, be aware of I think with horses, one of the things that we have to be aware of, and this was really interesting, in the apprenticeship this year, we had Sarah Griffiths on, who's one of the formulators for Adored Beast Apothecary. She talked a lot about like all the glyphosates in equine feed. And it's the same with people as well, with, you know, non-organic vegetables and things. These are things that we have to be aware of. But it really brought it home of realizing, yeah, everything that we feed our horses, it may not just be that thing. There might be additional stuff going on that we need to be aware of, right? For example, beet pulp is sprayed a lot because of its need, you know, the need for it to be pest-free or whatever, you know, in order to be consumed or not consumed, but to be processed. And so that's been a really interesting awareness to me, is, you know, all these things that we might use as a base or, you know, might use as an additive or a feed or even a hay for our horses. You know, are we aware of like, if it does it get sprayed? If so, you know, what are we doing about that? Is there maybe a more organic or non-GMO source of those things that we can bring into our horses' world, right? Because as we realize, like I have a horse with fecal water as well, like it's those tiny things that can make a really big difference for our horses, right? And like, yeah, the intention behind it as well. Like, you know, why are we giving these things? For those kind of horses, we'll often throw a bunch of supplements at them, trying to, you know, make the spaghetti like stick on the wall, you know, like, or, you know, trying to figure it out. But actually, they're the horses that need simplicity. They're the horses that need less, right? Like we want everything that we put in their feed to be so well thought out and to be really like not taxing their bodies, not making them work harder to get the nutrients, right? And I think that's a part of what you're talking about too, is like everything is with care, you know, when you put it in their feed, it's like, okay, I know why this is here. I mean, I will muscle test literally like once a week to make sure everything needs to go in the feed that I've been putting in, because stuff will change. It'll shift. It's like, okay, today she doesn't need that, or she needs this only, you know, once every few days, or maybe the level of minerals that she needs is a little bit less. So there's this felt sense that comes into the body of that. You know, what is needed in there. That's the best possible thing for each of them. And my girls have completely different supplements. Like I test for each one, and they have completely different things given the time of year and what they're wanting and needing and what they like. You know, those sorts of things all come into play for horses, you know, and you'll see it, like you'll see a horse, you'll add one supplement and they'll have eaten their grain every day for 2 weeks. Before that, you add one little thing in and they're like, no, don't want it. Right. And that's them also, you know, if you see them out in the wild, they're picking the medicine, you know, they've learned, their body has learned, like, I need that for this, I need this for that, right? And so I remember one amazing one was I used to work with flower essences, and I'd have them all in boxes, like 12 of them in a box. And I had one horse that I worked with, he was so in tune, and he would literally, I'd hold the boxes up in front of him and he'd touch his nose to the right box. And then he'd like touch his nose to like where the essence generally was. And then I'd muscle test just to make sure it was like the one he wanted. Right. And then I would work on him completely free. So like no halter, no lead rope. And then he would turn his body to show me like, okay, this is either in my mouth or it's on a body part. Like, so then I'd put it on the body part that he put in front of me, and it was always bang on. Right. So the sense of like horses, animals, we have this intuition about what our body wants and needs, and we're not always listening. And in domestication, a lot of horses lose some of that nuance, but I do believe that it can come back online, just like for us, right? Yeah.
You mentioned muscle testing. So for the people that are listening, I know that everyone has their own way of doing it. If they're like, oh, I want to check in with my horse's feet or their supplements, like how can I tap into that? Like, do you have an easy way to give them, or
I have an online course that I haven't announced to the public. Well, I haven't opened up to the public recently, which I plan to do. It's like on my to-do list. So that's one way that I do it. I also love find a lot of horse people. I do this in my apprenticeship. So applied kinesiology is like a big part of my apprenticeship. Usually we spend about 3 months really diving into like this kind of work together. And I find that actually a lot of horse people love pendulum work, because a lot of the time we don't have someone else to test on, and self-testing can feel weird. So a lot of people will actually start to learn more of the pendulum work, and they really enjoy it. So that tends to be, I always put that in as well with the applied kinesiology, because it's just like having something like external to you can be just nice for the human brain to like see something, this is outside of me, I'm seeing like a change in it, like it works a little better. So that's maybe this will be the impulse that I need Amber to put my course up.
I'm good at that, apparently, inspiring people to put their courses up.
Yeah.
Like 3 people in the last 6 months are like, my course is up because of you. I'm like, you're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's all ready. It's just like the tech stuff, but needs to get figured out. So, all right, we'll keep you posted on that. A great question. Yeah. It's amazing work.
That intuition piece, I feel like is such a big part of it. And I feel like Amber and I are on like a pretty good friend level at this point. And I always can empathize for people who have to run a boarding barn too. And like the clients are in control of their supplements, because we've had conversations where she's like, man, this, I can just feel that this horse doesn't need this supplement. And yet here we are having to put it in the food every day. And so she was just talking to me about how she's tried to change your mindset, right? And just be like, I know what you're saying to me, but this is out of my control. Yes. There's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
It was that and the blanketing, because there's horses here that I don't blanket mine anymore, because for the longest time I was just like, yeah, pin your ears. And they're like, clearly like, I don't like the blanket. And here I am. But then Shaylee is always talking about, people ask, how does my horse feel about the blanket? And it's very clear, it's a hard no. And they're like, well, I'm going to do it anyways. So we have a horse here who has told a communicator multiple times, I don't like the blanket, but she doesn't anyway. So when I have to put it on him at night, I'm like, I started just acknowledge. I used to apologize. I'm sorry. I don't have a choice. But then I started acknowledging, going, you should be upset. You should.
No, I think that's such a critical piece. And I was going to mention that the boarding piece makes it challenging, like on a number of levels. One would be the other side of things where, say, a barn only feeds these supplements and that is it, and you can't add anything really in. And also, on that side for you of like, okay, I feel, I'm intuition. The intuition is that this is what's needed, and then that's not happening. So I can definitely, it's, I think this is possibly one of my biggest challenges, even as an equine therapist and as an educator and things, is, okay, how do I step back a little bit? And like, what do I do for these horses? I have a lot of horses that I do what's called like, or not what's called, but what I call like Band-Aid treatments, right? Like, I know that they're going to go immediately back into work that's like not good for their bodies. And I know that I have no control over their feeding, or like, really anything. And it's always that question of like, what's the best that I can do here, I guess, is like what I always ask myself. Yeah. And like try to just, like you say, empathize with that horse, or like, I see what's going on. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But it's challenging.
And that's why
for
I'm
sure.
kind of like so interested in the energetic piece, because part of me is like, well, everything is energy. And even if this certain, food energy is not necessarily good for the horse, and they've told us this, and they have to get it anyway based on whatever. If the person who has to feed it, is just like, I am intending for this to do
Yep.
X, Y, or Z to your body, and setting that intention versus like, oh, I'm sorry. And you're
Yep.
putting it in with like that almost like negative energy. I had to learn that a little bit with my dogs, because I've been plant-based for a long time, and I haven't had meat in my house. And one of my dogs got extremely sick. I thought she was going to die, and I had to completely start feeding her raw, and I was blending up all the livers and the nasties. And I just was telling myself like, this is disgusting. Like, I hate that I have to do this, and it's not a thing. And then one day, like, she literally looked at me and was like, hey, I love that food. Like, can you quit talking bad about it? And I was like, oh, you're right. I've got to stop doing that. So now I'm like, thank you, cow, for, doing the thing that you need to do so that I can feed my dogs raw and she's good and healthy. But there's just, I feel like, such a big piece that goes into that. And just to spin on that a little bit, I'm curious, might get my head bitten off on this one a little bit by lifters. So as a body worker, I'm just curious, like, your opinion on like the different, not modalities, but like things that people, so like PEMF and Beamer and acupuncture and stuff. Like, what do you find in your experience about those sort of things?
Honestly, I mean, I'm always about collaboration, with everything that I do. And I get PEMF for Raven. I recommend it to other clients for inflammation. Absolutely. So yeah, I think it can all really work well together. Personally, I think it's like for me, it's like finding the right team for your horse, and that sometimes is even in relationship to like, what do you have access to? Like, we still live in a world, very much so, but even in North America, we live in a space where like not everybody has access to body workers, or like, these different things. So if you can purchase yourself a Beamer or whatever, it's definitely, in my mind, better than, not having any body work or care in that way at all. Yeah. And personally, I like frequency medicine. Like I enjoy that kind of medicine. I have like a red light pad for myself, and I was supposed to take it to the barn for Raven, and it's never left the house. It's so nice on my back. Yeah. So I have like an amethyst biomat on my treatments bed, and so I enjoy the combination of those particular pieces, and I think they can be super valuable given whatever's happening in certain scenarios. Absolutely. Like, yeah. So and horses, like, I've found, really kind of let like if it's not working for them, or if it's too much for them, they're pretty clear about it, as a general rule. So yeah, so that's kind of my opinion about that. I don't have any, like, I have colleagues that go out with like all their gear, and stuff, but I'm pretty, like, as a body worker, I guess, how do I say, I'm kind of lazy. No, that's not it. But like, like my friend Elise, like, she assesses for like an hour and a bit every horse, like legs and all these things. And I wish I was that person. But my back is like, no, that's not how you're going to treat. So I treat without picking up legs a lot. And I do a lot, my teacher, Dave Collins, his thing was using applied kinesiology in conjunction with priority testing with body work. And I still use that to this day. I really stand and listen and ask the body, where do my hands need to go, and how can I, where can they support most and in what way? And yeah, that's how I treat. I mean, obviously lots of new and different tools have come in over time. And now with the lens of the osteopathy, I treat a little differently, but I still kind of, come from that space of, really wanting to listen to the order and the way that horse is sharing that they're wanting to be worked with. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool how there's so many things available. I feel a little bit conflicted when it comes to things like that, just based on my experience as a communicator. It's interesting how I will know. So like with the PMF, for example, like I will know if someone just goes and scans the entire body versus leaves it in one spot, because there's something about, listening to the horse. And I guess that's the piece that's really important too, is like finding not only the modality that works for them, but like the practitioner that understands how to hear them, because they will have, maybe the equipment could be beneficial, but if you have a horse that needs it in a certain area and that person just goes off of base, what they learned or what they know rather than listening to the horse, then it's, not as effective.
Yeah. And I think a lot of practitioners, I mean, I get treating by route as well. I do that a little bit with my human osteopathy because that's how we learn the work. I also think that as someone grows as a practitioner, there's more spaciousness for the interface between what we've been taught, like you go from here to here to here to here, to interface more with, what is coming up through the uniqueness of that horse's needs and body and way of being, right? And that comes often with practice of like, putting your hands on hundreds, thousands of horses and just, okay, what does that look like to be in that sweet spot, in between those spaces where I'm not feeling constricted or restricted by this pattern of the way that I think I need to do things. And I can start to have this like co-creation of a session, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what I've learned a little bit about like the Beamer blanket, for example, is that you lose that piece. And so when I talk to horses, it seems that it has been recommended, I guess, to owners to just do like the longest time frame. So they'll show me, like, I actually have never used a Beamer blanket, but I know now that it has 3 levels. And because the horses will say like, I need this first one or this second one, and they very rarely choose the third. And it seems to me like with massage pads and Beamers and stuff like that, that little piece of like, oh, I'm starting to get a little bit overloaded or whatever, can be a little bit missed. So, and not that it's, that the blanket can't be effective, but maybe just mindful Beamering with horses.
Well, and it's different, right? If you're treating doing Beamer or PEMF on a person, you're getting constant verbal feedback about what's occurring in the system. And like, for example, for me, I am so sensitive that she literally has to like reroute her cords. She can't actually keep the machine like on its like regular setting because I can't even deal with the lowest setting of the regular setting. So she has to like do this fendangling so that it is like less than that, and that I can handle. So absolutely, I could see that, for most horses, why they would ask for these like lower settings, because, if that the pulse is too strong, it's really overwhelming, especially for those that are sensitive. Absolutely. Like I felt that when it was like really strong, I'm like, okay, I can't sit here. It's not going to work for me. So yeah, I can completely see that. And it's a good conversation to have, right? I think for each horse, it's going to be a little different. And it becomes even more imperative to be watching for, ears, eyes, tail, like pain signals, like what's going on in that horse. And, are they able to unwind? And not because of shutdown and kind of learned helplessness, but like actually receive the work and the frequency. So yeah, great question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this conversation really has sparked so many things for me, because now I'm thinking about teeth and how,
Yeah.
because because frequency stuff, like the frequency affects the teeth. And I learned through one of my horses who I tried PMF on, and he absolutely couldn't handle it. And I was like, well, why don't you like it? And he's like, well, it's affecting my teeth and the organs that are affected that are connected to my teeth. And then I'm like, what do you mean organs? So then I start looking up, and I'm like, holy crap, I had no idea that each tooth is connected to an organ, and like that plays a huge role. And it makes me think of like just how, and I don't know about you and your work, but I feel like a large majority of horses that I talk to have imbalances in their teeth, and like they just don't have full occlusion, and it's so tough. And I feel like it's really cool. I don't know if this is just my personal bubble or if it's everywhere, but I've been seeing so much awareness about feet and educating people about feet and the angles and all of this. And I'm just like hoping that like the next wave of education is going to be about teeth, because I will say, like, I have learned as much as I can. I feel like there's not a lot of like digestible information out there about teeth, and even how like the jaw functions. Like I didn't fully know exactly what it looked like and what all the joints looked like until my neuromuscular dentist kind of showed me a skull from behind and like chewed the mandible for me. And I was like, oh wow, because you hear that they only chew on one side at a time, and my mind would be like, well, how does that work? Like, and then I didn't understand like how the head could rotate or sink because of like poor occlusion. And then when I finally was able to see it, I'm like, man, so many more. I feel like there would be a lot more awareness about teeth, and a lot more I don't know if this is just how I feel, but sometimes I feel like there's not a lot of empathy for poor teeth occlusion. Like if a horse has a tooth issue and I say it, sometimes people will be like, oh well, they got their teeth done 6 months ago and it's almost brushed off. It's like there's not a lot of like, okay, this is an actual issue.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's in it up here. I mean, we're at the situation where it's like we can't even have natural balance dentists come. It's like it's been outlawed. And so it's tricky when the accessibility shifts to a point where only very specific people can get access to what I would consider a more holistic sense of the mouth, and someone who understands whether the natural balance dentistry or whatever, but understands like the full function of the jaw. And so often, I mean, it's such a controversial topic. It really is. And I think that's why it's so hard to find information about it. Because it is like people just don't talk about it. Because number one, they get in trouble, and it becomes this thing. And I know for my personal experience, like it's common to see poor occlusion, like you say, and a lot of horses have never had their incisors touched in any float. So that changes the way that their molars are sitting, that changes the way that their side to side occlusion is occurring, like their lateral occlusion. And that's challenging unless they see a different type of dentist that probably will never get worked with. And so there's kind of this sense of, okay, well, we'll just work with everything else and try to do the best that we can and hope for the best with the float. And some vets are better than others with that. Like I've seen I've had certain horses that have had a ton of jaw stuff, and I've told, okay, needs to be floated. And they've had, real change around. Absolutely. Like it definitely helps, right? But for some horses with unique scenarios, it can definitely be more challenging. And I feel like I'm in the same boat. I would love to see more information in more detail with more resources about, how we can help. It is one of those tricky things because I think a lot of owners, it makes me wonder, like, I know I feel this way of like, you feel a little bit of a powerlessness because it's not like you're going to be able to go, I'm not going to go out and buy my own dentistry tools and start like doing my horse's teeth, right? Like I'm just not going to do it. And I don't know many, like, I don't know anybody that necessarily would. So there's just this kind of sense of like, well, I can't do that. So I've just got to rely on like what I have available around me. And I know being like doing cranial work, like, yeah, often we're kind of working around jaws that aren't functioning well. It just becomes a part of the work, right? It's like, okay, like noted. And then, yeah, you'll be like, hey, when was the last time they got their teeth floated? It's like a month ago. Like, okay, like we'll just do what we can, right? So yeah, it's I don't know what else to say on that. But yeah, totally controversial topic. And like you, would love to see more information and more conversation about it. Because it is like, we know, oh yeah, this affects the organs, but it also affects the hind end, it affects the back, it affects the way that they can use the thoracic sling, it affects their whole cranium. Like it's a huge thing, right? When this isn't working for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it,
and just like,
sorry, is it not available because they're having only vets can do it? Is that what?
Yeah. So years ago it was more available here, and then now it's like only vets. Which is fine in a lot of circumstances, but it can be more challenging in unique circumstances because typically they're not using hand tools, using power floats, right? It's just a different level of nuance typically, right? Yeah. And the horses are generally always sedated, right? So they're in a position, physically speaking, that can be challenging to see the function of the whole jaw and how it's going to work for them when they're moving and when they're in function. Yeah.
I think it would be really cool to have more information around it. And just so this is just something that popped into my mind, and I'm curious what you guys think about this. And I think this is just the phase of life that I'm in right now, where thanks to Amber, I'm like doing this generational dive right now and like finding like my generational traumas. And it's like such a long story, but I was telling Amber that like I've had acne my whole life, and she's like, well, you should look into like the generational stuff behind it and like what you're bringing forward. And so I like dove into my maternal line and found like a lot of like not being able to speak up and wanting to be hidden. Like my mom went by an alias at her like church camp. Like she didn't go by her real name because she wanted to be like hidden. And so I found that, and I realized through animal communication and just doing this little inner dive that even dogs and cats have a lot of dental dysfunction. And while it doesn't affect their bodies as strongly as it does, in my opinion, the horses, that there is a lot of dysfunction in the mouth. And it makes me think of like how much of it is generational and us not feeling like we can speak. Like I know that when I first started my journey, I had a very blocked throat chakra. Like I struggled with it. And I'm curious because our animals, like I think of my thoroughbreds and how they've had like years and years of submission like bred into them essentially. And then our dogs, how there's like sayings like you're meant to be seen and not heard, like don't be barking when I'm busy. How much of like, I know that there's like a level of education that goes into it, but I'm just like been diving into more of like, well, how much of it is this too, and is this why we don't want to talk about it?
That's such an interesting question. I've honestly never thought about it from that. I mean, I've thought about generational trauma and generational, like what gets passed down the line. It's super interesting. I used to do an exercise in one of my courses where I would get people to bring a photo of their horse, and then I would get them to pass it to their neighbor. And then we would do a visualization about generational influences. So I would say, okay, we're going to go back to where this horse's ancestors were in the industrial age. Where were they in, war times? Where were they in, back, and then, back before everything, before domestication. And it's super fascinating, right? Like, it was really interesting to see, the thoroughbreds, the drafties, like the Arabs, like all the differences with these horses. The Arabs were like, oh, we were just like so worshipped all the way along, so fabulous. And you see like these poor draft horses are like, oh my God, we've really been through it. And, like each horse having these different patterns, and obviously like there's a uniqueness to each one as well, right? Like, it was very interesting when someone had a cross, or like a more of a rescue type breed. Like, these things came through this exploration as well, and obviously not an exact science, but just this sense of like, where have horses been? I mean, they've had huge amounts of generational trauma, not like, still incurring more. And I think the past 100 years probably been a big chunk of it for a lot of horses, right? And like it's just really, I find it fascinating, and I'm going to think more on this question about teeth with that, because I do find, I mean, in my human clients, like teeth and jaw are a huge thing. Like, I have so many clients that come in and go, oh, I have jaw pain. Oh, I clench my teeth. Oh, when I'm stressed, I have all this stuff in my jaw and my neck. Like, it's so common, right, to have these patterns around clenching and like changes in the teeth, and what that means in terms of like well-being and stress and all of this. So I'll think more on that for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Curious if you had any minis in that exercise.
I didn't. No.
Dang it.
I wish. I know. Oh my gosh, that'd be such an interesting little journey.
I know. You might have to do it in your next apprenticeship, because I'm like so curious, like what minis would say. And it's so funny because like one of the first clinics that I went to that Celeste was hosting, she was working with this like little pony, and he was so sassy. And she was like, this is why you came back small, because your personality is so big and you couldn't be dangerous. Like, this is why you came back small. And that stuck with me, and I love it so much. And now whenever my like mini is sassy, I'm like, man, you must have been crazy in a past life because you came back small.
I mean, whenever I talk to a mini and I ask them what they look like, have you done this? Like, ask the minis that you work with what they think they look like. Honestly.
Yeah, I've never done it.
15 hand quarter horse most of the time, at least over 15 hands, and sassy. They don't think of themselves as little minis. Absolutely not. It's quite funny. So yeah, this is why I want a mini like so bad. I'm not allowed to have one right now because I don't have a suitable situation, but one day, mini, we're going to be together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we both have our token minis, so you need to get on board.
Oh yeah. I know a client offered me like the cutest little like white, she had like a little white one the other day. And I was like, I just can't, I need to be responsible. It's very hard. It's very hard to be responsible. Yeah. So
no, but the thing about having a mini is that it can't match your other herd. So it's got to be like the 3 chestnuts and a off-colored mini, my 3 black horses, and a Palomino mini. So you have to get one that like, totally doesn't match.
Well, that's what I thought. Like, I was like, she's white.
It's a sign.
But I asked her about it, the mini. I asked her about it. She's like, no, I don't want to come to you. She's like, I love where I'm at. I'm like, okay, fair. You're not my mini. That's cool. I'm really glad we had this conversation.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's not time, not yet. Yeah, I'll keep you posted though someday. Don't worry, it'll be all over my Insta. Yeah.
Wow, what a fun conversation.
Totally. Yeah, it's great to meet you both. I was saying before the podcast that I get to meet both these amazing ladies in June, like
So
in
excited.
person.
Real life. I've actually never met, me and Shaylee have never met in real life either, which is so bizarre because I feel like we've known each other our entire lives. People are like, you guys have never met? Like, no, I haven't met her, but I hadn't met Celeste until a couple months ago, and it was just like, oh, hi. And it's like, people are like, you guys have never met? We're like holding on to each other. No, I've never met.
Amazing.
So funny.
I love that.
Well, thank
Yay.
you so much for joining us today. We had so much fun. If people want to dive deeper into your work and your classes and your apprenticeship and stuff, like where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is alexalinton.com, and most things are there. I am in the process of needing to create a new website, everybody, so be patient with me. I've literally got like so many comments and things on there, like, you know, spammy comments that I can't get into my back end at the moment. So I'm taking it as a sign. But for right now, all the information is there that you will need. And yeah, apprenticeship starts every year in September because I feel like that's like, you know, the learning month. That's when you start school. That's just how my brain works. So it's, 6 months, September to March. And I usually launch that so you can keep your eyes open in July. And everything else is there with cranial programs and things. There's links there. And if you're on Vancouver Island, you can come and see me for osteo.
Nice.
Because, you know, that's really fun. Yeah, there you go. And yeah, you can always email me, alexa@alexalinton.com. And I'm on Instagram at Alexa Linton. Easy.
And you have your podcast.
And I have my podcast. So you can listen to that on Spotify or iTunes. It's called the Whole Horse Podcast. Yeah.
Yay.
Totally.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so fun.
Oh, absolutely. This has been great. You're very welcome.